All right, hello again, everyone. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And for the AWD1000 Web Technologies class, I am going over the PowerPoint presentations for the 19 chapters in Murachs HTML and CSS3 3rd edition. I'm on Chapter 2, which is on web page coding, testing, and validation. So, again, I'm going to skip the stuff in here that uses Aptana Studio 3 because, as I said, I want to show you a bunch of different alternatives and let you pick the one you're most comfortable with, all right? But we will talk about how to use a text editor to create and edit HTML and CSS files, how to test HTML by loading it into the browser, how to validate both HTML using the W3C markup service and validate CSS using, again, the markup service. Those are our applied objectives. For our knowledge objectives, we have described the use of the head and body elements in an HTML document, describe opening tags, closing tags, and empty tags, describe the use of attributes within HTML tags, describe the use of HTML comments and white space, describe the components of a CSS rule set, describe the use of CSS type selectors, ID selectors, and class selectors, explain how and why you would start a new HTML or CSS file from a template, describe 3 ways to run a web page, and describe 2 of the benefits of validating files. All right. So I've already shown you this in the last chapter, but the author is showing here kind of a little template, so to speak, on how you would typically create an HTML document. Now, earlier when they showed this doc type, the word doc type was in lowercase. That's how I always do it, but it will work whether it's lowercase, uppercase, or mixed case. The recommendation when you're using tags to create a document is to keep everything in lowercase. So that's what I'm going to do, even though it's not shown here. But that's your doc type declaration. Everything is within HTML tags. Notice here they don't have the attribute that says lang equals en for English. All right. Here are your beginning and ending head tags, your beginning and ending body tags. And you notice, except for the doc type, every one of these tags has a beginning tag and an end tag. And they look the same, except the end tag has a / before it. So here's an example of a document. This is similar to what we looked at in the last chapter. So remember, the head, what's in the head here, this is information that doesn't show on the web page itself. This is information that the browser uses, possibly that the search engine uses. The stuff that's within the body, that is what actually does appear. That physically does appear on the web page itself. So, again, the author recommends you do everything in lowercase because it's easier to read. I agree with that, but not only is it easier to read, it's considered more of a standard practice, just so you're aware of that. And you are, for lack of better words, you are coming up with your own protocol as far as how to do things. And that's always considered to be a good idea. All right. So here's some tags you could put in here, beginning and ending H1 tags, beginning and ending P tags that have both a beginning and an end, or an opening and a closing tag. The BR tag, which stands for line break, it's like you hit the enter key. And the image tags are 2 tags that are called empty tags because they don't have any closing tags. If you put tags within tags, all right, that's called nesting tags. You always put the inner tags, beginning and end, within the outer tags. So beginning P, ending P, and inside of those beginning I and ending tag. You don't do this. Beginning P, ending P, beginning I, ending I. You don't do that. Now, it may actually work, but when you go to validate your document, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it will not validate. All right. So here's an example of what are called attributes. So the tag is the A tag, A for anchor. Here's one attribute that's in there. The one attribute is the href. So this is the file you want to have open up. All right, here's some additional attributes. Here's the title tag. I believe if you put your mouse over the link, a little tooltip will come up with this on it. And this, we're setting a class for that tag. Here's an empty tag, which also has attributes. We looked at this in the last chapter, that an image tag should always have at least a source attribute, which has the name of the image, and an alt attribute, which will show that if the image cannot be shown or if the person looking at it does not have the ability to see images. Here is an example of a Boolean attribute. Boolean means true or false. You used to have to say checked equals checked. Now you just say checked, which means if that's a checkbox, it'll have a check next to it or inside of it. We're going to get into, especially in chapters 4, 5, and 6, which are all on CSS, we're going to talk about IDs and classes in a lot of depth and breadth of coverage. All right. Some of the coding rules. You'll have the name of the attribute, an equal sign, and the value for an attribute, although you don't have to put the attribute in double quotes or single quotes. You typically will anyway, and I recommend using double quotes. Boolean attributes, again, you used to have to say here checked equal checked. Now you can just say the name of the attribute. If you've got multiple attributes like we looked at here, you separate each of the attributes with just a space. Again, the author, and I agree with the author here, enclose all attribute values in double quotes. So, why is some of this in yellow? Well, what you see here, a less than sign, an exclamation point, minus, minus, that's the beginning of an HTML comment. It won't be yellow like this, but in many editors it'll display in green. So that's the beginning of the comment, that's the comment text, that's the end of the comment. Beginning of the comment, comment text, and the end of the comment. This is an example where we have commented some code out. Maybe it's not working correctly, so we comment it out to just take a look at it. The author recommends a liberal use of white space to make stuff easier to read. I agree. I may even go a little bit overboard, but I've never had anyone look at my stuff and say, well, that's really difficult to read. Now, the author says don't overdo the white space because it does add to the size of the file. I agree with that, but yet you can be fairly liberal with it. Now, this right here, this is an introduction, just an introduction to cascading style sheets. All right? So this says I want to take all H1 tags, and then inside of the curlies, I want the color of all those to be navy. So the selector, we want to select H1 tags. The property we want to set is the color property. The value we want to set that color property to is navy. So you've got the selector, then in curly braces, one or more property value combinations. A CSS document looks similar to an HTML document, but when you do comments, you use a slash star and a star slash. But if you've got a document that's full of CSS, it's going to look a lot like this. It could be much more complex than that. All right? All right. You'll notice in here we've got class equals, there's an ID equals. What you put in here, these are selectors, the body, the H1, the H2, etc. But we can also put in a pound sign, which means, so notice here we've got ID equal copyright. So that's pound copyright. Here we've got class equal base color. With a class, you use a period, dot base color. So this says the copyright will be 75% of the regular size, and it'll be aligned to the right, as you can see right there. The class says, the base color says that stuff will be in blue. So you can see how that appears here. Again, I'm not going to go through any Aptana stuff here. So I'm going to buzz through a lot of this stuff that's in here quickly. All right. So what are common errors that you can make? Common coding errors. You can create an opening tag that needs an ending tag, and you don't put the ending tag in. Quite often it's done. You can misspell a tag name. So an alt tag, you leave the L out, so it's an at tag instead of an alt tag. You spell an attribute name wrong. Instead of href, you put href, something like that. You've got a beginning double quote and not an ending double quote, or a beginning single quote and not an ending single quote. Or what some people do, you can't start with a single quote and end with a double quote, or vice versa. They have to be in pairs. All right. Incorrect file references. So you're linking to a CSS file that's not there, or an image that's not there, or an anchor tag that's not there. People do things like this. How to set syntax colors. This again is an Aptana thing. So this lecture is probably only going to be in the area of about 15 minutes in length. All right, but I am going to break out and show you a couple things on it. So, how to start a new CSS file. Again, that's Aptana specific. Again, common coding errors you can make. We already mentioned some of this stuff. Three ways to run a web page that's on an intranet or on your own computer. All right. Typically, the easiest way is to take the file that's in a folder and double click on it. But you can also do a file open in the browser, and there's different ways of doing it depending on the IDE or the editor that you're using. Okay. Now, when you bring up a web page, if you look right here, in fact, right there, that means reload the page. So if you bring a web page up and it doesn't work, and you click here, it should reload the page. It's always recommended that when you create a web page, you validate it. When you create a CSS file, you validate it. All right, so I'm going to, at the end of this lecture, because it's only going to be, like I said, about 15 minutes long, I'm going to break out of here, create a very simple web page and a very simple style sheet for it, and then validate both of those. All right, I'll try to create it with no errors, and then I'll put some errors in. So this is the W3C validator that we will use, validator.w3.org. All right, and if it works, if there's errors, you're going to get red for errors, yellow for warnings, and if it works, it's going to be green. All right, and there's a similar one called Jigsaw that is used for CSS. All right, so that's it for this presentation. But that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break out of here. Keep getting that error, and I'm not sure why. So I'm going to break out of here. I'm just going to do this very quickly in Notepad++. So let me just put together a CSS file. Again, this is very simple on purpose. All right, not hardly anything in this particular web page. I'll put in a paragraph. And then I'm going to copy that paragraph and make about 4 paragraphs. All right. All right. Now I'm going to save this onto my desktop, and I'm just going to call it index.html. All right. Then I'm going to go and add to it. You can see how the colors changed. I'm going to add a CSS file. I'm going to make it an external file. Don't worry if you don't know what this means. All right, that file doesn't exist, so I'm going to create it right now. And I'm going to say body. And just so you can see it, so it really stands out here, whoops, I'm going to say color red, which should make all of my text red. I'm going to add an H1 tag, which I don't have in there right now. And I will also come in here and say font family Arial Helvetica Sans, I think it's sans serif. All right, and for the H1 tag, I'm going to make that blue. And I will make the font size, I don't know, 48 point. It's going to be very big. Okay, so I'm going to save that also to the desktop, and that's going to be style.css. All right, so that's done. But I need an H1 tag in here. My first website. Okay, and what I will do is I will put an ID in here. ID equal, we'll call it first para for first paragraph. All right, and that first paragraph, we'll just do a little bit of magic here. So we're going to say pound first para for the first paragraph, and we're going to say text transform. I think this is right. Uppercase, and I may be doing that wrong, but I think that that's correct. All right, so I've created a very simple. Oh, I thought I saved that, but that's a different file, so don't worry about it. Yeah, because I've got a bunch of other files open here. All right, so when I come in here and I run this now, when I run this, notice what happens. Okay, so there's my blue and everything else is in red. All right, the last thing that I want to do in here is I want to go out and I want to validate this. So I'm going to go in my address bar and I'm going to type in HTML Validator. And it brings up the validator for me. All right, so the easiest way to do this is to go by direct input, and I'm going to go back to my file in here. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to literally just paste it in there. There's the same code that I just showed you, and if I click check, you'll notice it comes up and it says it's green. It says no errors or warnings. On the other hand, if I go back to that file, and I'm going to leave off this p tag on purpose here. All right, I'm going to leave that off, and I'm going to misspell body. So I'm going to put in BODI. I'm purposely making errors in here. All right, now when I come back to here, and I type that in with a mistake, so there's body, etc., and I click check, you're going to notice I get errors. Stray tag, it doesn't understand that. And it didn't show anything about the paragraph tag, which surprises me. All right, but let's fix the body tag and see if I get any other errors. So it says there's no errors, but really technically there was because I left the p tag off. All right, so I really should go back and fix that, and it is correct in here. Well, it will be. All right, and the last thing is I want to grab this CSS file that's in here that, again, I think right now is correct, and I want to come out here to CSS Validator. And you want the easiest one to use, because there is more than one, is the one that's got Jigsaw on it right there. And it works very similar to the one I just showed you. So I can click in here, grab this, paste it in, click check. Again, no errors found. All right, but if I come back to my file, and I'm going to purposely put some errors in here, and I'm purposely putting in errors. And I'm going to come back here and run this, and you see it found errors. And it's letting me know where the errors are that it found. All right? 48 PTA, it doesn't know what that means. Text trans from doesn't exist. So I go back again to where I just was, change it so that it is correct. And once I do that and I go and run it again, everything's back. All right, so that works. And my document, my HTML document, that, whoop, I guess I didn't change that one tag, or if I did, I didn't change it correctly. That's it. So that is now correct, and if I come back and refresh, there's my site. All right, so that's the end of Chapter 2.